I think that was one of the first times I've been introduced without knowing how I'm being introduced. So I hope he said kind things about me. Like a typical British person, I only speak English. So I'm very, very sorry, but you'll have to listen to my British accent. But that's what you expect of people from the UK. So I'm here delivering on brand, so that's fine. My name's Lisa Forte. I work in cybersecurity. I've worked in cybersecurity for a long time. I'm actually one of the ambassadors in the United Kingdom for the government's program to get more people into cybersecurity. And it's something I'm really passionate about. And when I was thinking about what I'm going to talk to you about today, I thought I could talk about the industry, I could talk about the opportunities that we have in cybersecurity. And then I thought, no, I think what we want to talk about today is probably one of the most important parts of cybersecurity, and it is something that so many people, even working in the industry now, forget about. And that is understanding the threat actors that we face, understanding how they operate, what they're thinking, how they're doing things, because that tells us everything we need to know about how we do our jobs. And it's actually going to be quite surprising. So I'm going to talk about one particular group of threat actors. And they are a really problematic group. It doesn't matter what country you're in Europe, America, South America, Asia. These are a massive problem, and they are ransomware groups. But we know a lot about ransomware groups now. And actually, I think I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey that hopefully will surprise you about how they operate. So what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at who are the ransomware groups, how do they operate. I think a lot of you might think that they are the hacker wearing a hoodie in a basement by themselves. You will be surprised. That is not how they do this. And how do they make money? Because everything that these groups do is about making money, and they are really, really good at making money. So let's just talk about ransomware for a second, in case you don't know what ransomware is, or in case you don't know what the threat actually looks like. Many years ago, ransomware is not a new attack at all. Many years ago, what they used to do was get into organizations, and they would encrypt all of the files. And that organization wouldn't be able to operate. Then they'd say, pay us the ransom, and we will decrypt all your files, and everything can go back to normal. The thing is, what organizations started to do, what companies started to do, was have really good backups. And so actually, then, when your stuff was encrypted, all the company would do would say, okay, well, we'll roll back, we'll take our backups, and we'll restore from there. We will lose maybe 2-3 weeks of data, but okay, we'll just do that. And so the ransomware groups weren't getting money anymore because people had backups. So what they did was they decided to innovate. And they now go into companies, and they'll sit there, usually for a few months, quietly, and they'll slowly start to copy all of the data that that company has, and they'll take it out of the company. So they'll take a copy of all of that data. Then they'll encrypt everything, and now they say, okay, cool, you've got backups, that's fine. We've got your data. And if you don't pay us, we're going to put the data online for everybody to see. Now what have you got? And it's got to a point where globally, around 86% of companies pay the ransom as a result of this. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry that is highly organized, as we'll see later on in this talk, and is very, very much driven by profit and innovation. These groups know how to make money. They are really, really good at making money quickly, and they're really, really good at making sure companies pay the ransom. And that's what we're going to look at today. So how do we know how they operate? Well, when I was in the cybercrime unit in the UK for the police, we sort of knew that they were quite sophisticated because the way they would operate would be very tactical. It would be very smart. The way they would communicate with victims was very good. But overall, we didn't have a great understanding of who these people were because they're very difficult to find. People used to say to me when I was in the police, well, can't you just trace the money and find the criminals? And it doesn't work like that. It's almost the perfect crime because it's very, very difficult to find these people. And even if you do find where they are, they could be in a country where you cannot call up their law enforcement agency and say, hey, would you mind arresting these people? And that tends to be how they operate. But something changed, and we got a really good look at how these groups actually operate. So let me ask you a question. Who knows what happened on this date? Anyone want to hazard a guess? Go on. There are lots of people talking. Just shout something out. No? This was the day that Russia invaded Ukraine. And on the 24th of February, in the morning, I remember opening my news app and seeing Russian military vehicles cross the border into Ukraine. And everybody in Europe was sort of in shock that this had happened. Something else happened this day, though, that changed the field of ransomware for a long time. And essentially what happened was one of the biggest ransomware groups we have ever seen had a really big problem. This was one of the biggest ransomware groups, and they were really problematic, and they caused a lot of damage for years, and they were really, really good at it. And Conti, that was the name of the group, they had a lot of people who were Russian working for them, but they also had Ukrainians, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all these other ex-Soviet countries also working in their group. And they put out a statement that kind of went bad for them. And they basically said, we as a ransomware group are in full support of the Russian government. And anybody who decides to do anything against Russia as a result of this, we will come down hard on them. The problem was, they had a lot of people who were Ukrainian who were working for Conti. And at this moment, those people who were Ukrainian copied every single document, every single chat, every single email, every single Telegram message, and put it on Twitter for everybody to see. And for the first time ever, we saw what really goes on inside a ransomware group. And information just came pouring out, and we saw tons of information coming out about how they operate, about what their concerns were, what their strategies were. And all of a sudden, we got a glimpse, we got a sight into how immensely organized these groups were. For example, they have all specified job roles. So they'll have a CEO, essentially. They'll have a CFO. They will have HR. And those HR people are responsible for recruiting into the group. They're also responsible for things such as sick leave, which you're also supposed to put in requests for to the group. They're responsible for pay. They're responsible for disciplinary action, just like in any company that you work in. We saw people who were technical. We had people who were working in call centers to help support the victims who needed help buying Bitcoin if you hit them with ransom. So they had all of these job roles that were really specified and had contracts and everything else, and it was really organized. This was one quote from one of the leaks. This was one of the recruiters called Salmon, who worked for Conti, and he's talking to a new recruit, a new hire that has just come into the organization. And he's saying, the weekends are the weekends. No one cancels vacations and sick days. And everyone got set vacation days, set holiday. They got 2 months a year holiday paid. If you were sick, you had to bring in a doctor's note. It was organized. It was run exactly like a company. The only slight difference was if you did something bad, if you, for example, didn't turn up to work one day, you would actually get some of your salary deducted, which was a bit different. And the other thing that I think was surprising was we always thought that somehow the idea of a ransomware hacker would be a young, maybe 20-year-old male who was doing it. What we discovered was that's not true at all. There are all different types of people working within ransomware groups. They have a great equality and diversity policy within their groups. For example, this individual was actually working in a higher education, so in a school or a college, and they were actually recruited in having worked in this college. So they were someone who had a legitimate job working in a school or a college or a university, who was actually recruited into this group to do crimes, which is incredible. And he's obviously not that young. The other thing we realized was they're not working from home. They're not working with the hoodie in the basement. That's not at all what is happening. They have office space. They rent office space around the world. And this was one chat that got leaked, and they're talking here about equipment in the office. They're talking about what they need to do to set up different things for different team leaders. So they had offices. They talk about the right chairs and the right mouse to stop the injuries in the hand from working too much by a desk. They have all of this stuff set up. And this just blew our minds. And we were thinking about it afterwards, and we were sort of saying, this is just like a whole new level of organization, which changes a lot about how we view ransomware, I think. And so that happened a few years ago. And we sort of understood that ransomware groups were obviously very organized, and they obviously had this structure that was very similar to the companies that we work for, right? So we got a bit of an understanding of that. And then last month, we had another similar scenario play out. This ransomware group called Black Basta. Last month, they had a bit of an issue. So one of the things that Black Basta had typically done, they'd been very problematic. They'd hit massive companies around the world like Capita and other really, really big companies. They'd hit healthcare providers. They'd caused a lot of problems. The FBI were after them. Europol were after them. They were a really, really big problem in the cybercrime industry. And last month, they made a bit of a mistake. And essentially what happened was, I don't know if it was by accident or if it was someone within the group who decided to do this, but someone decided to hit a Russian bank. And they hit the Russian bank with ransomware, and all of a sudden, same story, all of their data ended up online, all of their chats ended up online. And we started to get a bit of a glimpse into not just how the structure of the organization worked, like with Conti, but we actually started to get an idea of how they were targeting organizations, which was really interesting. So some of the things that I think we need to understand from Black Basta was they actually ran things similar to this. They ran CTF competitions to test potential new recruits, to see how skilled you were at doing things, and then they'd assess you to see if you were right for the job to come and work for them by running competitions like this. In one case, they actually had one of their recruits was 17 years old, so ridiculously young. Who has heard of the phrase social engineering? Quick show of hands. Quite a few people. So social engineering is a tactic attackers use to get into organizations. And usually what that will look like is it will be a phishing email, pretending to be someone asking you to click on a link, open an attachment, something like that. Or it will be a phone call or something like this. You'll have probably experienced it. I'm sure you've all received WhatsApp messages or emails that are not from who they say they're from in order to get you to do something. It's the same thing with this. Only Black Basta had a set of social engineering playbooks. They had scripts. So they said, if you're going to call up a bank, this is the script that you run. You say, hello, I'm so-and-so, your boss has asked me to do this, your boss has asked me to do that. And they had each of these in every single language you can imagine. So they had them in English, they had them in Spanish, Portuguese, Italian, every language you can imagine. They had people who were fluent in those languages, so when they call up a Spanish bank, they sound Spanish. When they call up a UK bank, they sound like they're from the UK, which is incredible. They also said that the key thing with making sure you didn't think anything suspicious was happening was they would call you up, for example, and they'd say, hey, I've got a problem with an invoice. Can I email it to you? And you'd say, yeah, of course, send me the email. You're now expecting an email with an invoice. So you get the email. The invoice is attached. You're expecting it because you've just had a phone call. You click on the attachment. They get into the company. But the key thing they said was, they send an email saying, thank you so much for reviewing that invoice. I really appreciate it. We'll be in touch. Now you think there's nothing wrong with it. You don't report it to your security team. You don't think there was anything suspicious going on. In their documents, the average time they were in an organization without being noticed was 5 months. Imagine what you can do, what you can view, what you can copy in 5 months without being detected. It's incredible. But they had internal issues too. They had loads of chats. It's all online. If you Google it, you can go and read it. It is in Russian, so you do have to translate it, but it's there. They had lots of arguments about people making more money than them and their colleague taking this much money, and they had lots of internal arguments as well. It wasn't sort of this great harmonious thing. And their biggest concern in the chats was somebody within their group, someone within Black Basta, who would be either working for another ransomware group or working for law enforcement. And they were paranoid about someone being involved that might be working for the FSB or the FBI or someone like that. And the last thing on this part that I want, before I show you some of the chats that I want to pull up on, they didn't pick companies by random. They didn't just go, okay, we'll go after this IP address or we'll go after this one or this one. They had rules. So one of their rules was, we don't attack hospitals. And if we accidentally attack a hospital, we will provide them with the decryptor codes to decrypt their data. They also had a list, which was on Google Sheets document, of companies that they wanted to target in each country. And next to it, it showed the LinkedIn profiles of the key people in that company. It showed the types of clients that that company had. And they had a column for the reason that they thought this company would be good to attack. And some of these things would be stuff like, oh, they've got lots and lots of personal data, so they're more likely to pay. Or they're clearly making lots of money, or they're involved in this, that, and the other. And they said in their chats that the key thing was you don't attack local government, you don't attack hospitals, and you don't attack the police. Because if you do that, that country's law enforcement will come after you. But if you go after a manufacturing company or a factory or something like that, you'll be fine, and you can make all the money you want. So they were hiring. This is one of the chats that's it's translated into English from Russian, so it's not brilliant English. But essentially, they were sort of saying that they need to hire more people, and they actually used actual recruiters. So they didn't go out on the dark web. They actually called up recruitment companies to recruit people into a criminal enterprise, would you believe? And they give them above market rate, and it was quite substantially above market rate. So for the jobs that they were advertising, people were getting 4 or 5 times what you would get in a legitimate company, which is a lot of money. In the cybersecurity industry, that's an awful lot of money. You're talking hundreds of thousands of euros, which is a lot of money for people. They also had problems as well. So this was one chat that came out of it where they were moaning about other people. And one person, so they all use a pseudonym. So Best Flowers says, "There's no point in expecting anything from anyone here. No one will give you anything." He's having a bit of a meltdown. And his friend says, "It's just a bit offensive to learn from strangers that people you did something and didn't even tell you. And that's what bothers me the most." And then he says, "Well, you raised 20 to 30 million and weren't going to share it with them. They are the same," which is where the chat gets a little bit different from what I have with my friends. And then they said, "Well, then that means you have to come up with ideas yourself and take your own risks. There is one greedy person in the team, and he influences the others." So you can tell that not everything was all happy. But as you can see, when they're talking about 20 or 30 million like it's nothing, we've got a really big problem. So one of the other really interesting things that came out of these leaks, and one of the questions you might have is, okay, if these groups attack a company and that company pays 20 million euros in a ransom, that's a lot of money to have to hide, right? That's an awful lot of money to make sure the government and the police don't see where that money goes. So how do they hide that money? And one of the things that came out of the Blackbuster leaks was how they did that and how they were doing that. And it's really interesting because essentially Blackbuster and ransomware groups generally will always ask for payment, usually in Bitcoin or Monero. If you pay in Monero, they'll usually give you a discount because some of you may know, Monero is a privacy coin. Privacy in the Monero blockchain is such that it's almost completely untraceable. You can't really tell who's sending what to who and by what amount. So it means it's completely anonymous. So they'll give you a discount if you pay in Monero. But one of the problems they have is, if a company pays 20 million, and if I pay 20 million to you in Bitcoin, congratulations. I pay 20 million to you in Bitcoin. You have to now account for that at some point when you turn that into what we call fiat currency, when we turn it into euros or pounds or dollars. You can't just take 20 million Bitcoin and be like, "Oh, it just happened to appear in my account." People are going to ask questions, right? So what you have to do is make it look like it comes from a legitimate source. This is what we call money laundering. Cleaning this money to make it look like it's legitimate. And the way they do that is a couple of things. The first thing they do is they'd actually use something called mixing services. So you pay your 20 million in Bitcoin, and you'd pay it into a number of wallets. And then what they'd do is they'd mix that up with other people's Bitcoin into this thing, and then pay it out to random other wallets in random amounts of money. Now, this means, as law enforcement, I could never tell if this Bitcoin here came from this attack here. It would be impossible. Then what they do is they take the Bitcoin and they convert it into Monero. They then move that, and then they take it to an exchange, and they what we call off-ramp it, take it into fiat currency, take it into euros, for example. But they were clever, because what they'd do is before they do that, they would take the cryptocurrency and they would run it through something to basically test how clean that Bitcoin looked, for example. And these are things like, there's lots of things that you can use for this, like AML bots and things like that. Essentially, you put your Bitcoin into it, and it gives you a percentage chance that they think it's dirty. So it will sort of say, oh, okay, 40% chance it's clean. That's pretty good. And in their chats, they said, if you got back 70 or 80% score, you would know, okay, I need to do that process again because I'm going to get flagged at the exchange. So they tested it. And then they would move a tiny amount out and see if the exchange would let that out. And if the exchange said yes, then they'd move a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more, and a bit more. And the next thing you know, you have got 30 million euros clean in an account that you can spend. It's money laundering like we have never seen ever before in society. It's the ability to use large quantities of dirty money without trace, completely, perfectly, without any problem. And so this is part of the issue that we have. So what does this mean for us? It's all well and good looking at the stories. It's all well and good sort of laughing about how organized these groups are. But it's a really big problem, because if you think about a ransomware group, and let's say that per year they might make 400, 500 million euros. And you think about our governments and our police and our companies, do they have 500 million euros to spend on cybersecurity? Definitely not. Which means we're massively outgunned. We do not have the same power that these ransomware groups have. It also means something else that's really worrying. For the first time ever in history, organized crime groups have enough money to purchase 0 days. 0 days on the dark web go for $10, $20 million. If you're making what they're making, you have more than enough money to purchase those 0 days if you want. And that changes the game massively. So actually, the fact that they can commit these crimes, get away with it, run a whole organization that makes so much money, and they can't be caught through it, that creates a massive problem for the cybersecurity industry. And it creates a problem for us on all these different levels: our hospitals, our airports, our governments. Everything that we are running off of is potentially vulnerable, and that creates a massive, massive problem for us. So if we just think about the impacts of ransomware for a second, and as I said, this is just one group of threat actors, and there are a lot of others that operate in other different ways that are interesting, but that would be an entire conference lot of content, so I've stuck to just ransomware groups. But the impacts of a ransomware attack, and the thing that I do when I'm not coming to events like this and speaking, I work with companies around the world to help them prepare. So I create crisis management playbooks and exercises to help them prepare for the worst case scenario and make sure they can deal with it. And when I work on an incident, the impacts are obviously financial. Huge amounts of money. Even if you don't pay the ransom, you are looking at millions, potentially, in forensics costs, in recovery costs, in downtime, in lawsuits, in regulator costs from GDPR. All of this stuff will cost you an awful lot of money. The financial implications of being attacked are absolutely huge. You've also got a ton of data that's been leaked. Imagine just for a second you were responsible for the data in a hospital, and that data gets stolen and put online. Imagine what damage that could do to the people whose data that is. Healthcare data, HIV status, cancer patient data, all online for people to see. Huge amounts of damage from that. And then the final one is loss of operations. So when they attack you, and they steal your data, what they'll tend to do is they'll put it up on their website. So this is one website from a ransomware group which they have called their Happy Blog. I don't know, they have a sense of humor, apparently. So they've called it their Happy Blog, and they'll basically put the company that they've stolen the data from, and then they'll list the time, you'll see at the bottom. So this company has 6 days, 20 hours, and 56 minutes to pay the ransom. If by that time you haven't paid the ransom or you haven't paid a deposit, they'll publish it. Then what they'll do is they'll send the link to this to every journalist they can imagine. They'll publish it on Twitter. They'll tag cybersecurity influencers. They'll tag anyone they can possibly think of so that everyone's talking about it. Because what they want is to punish you for not paying. So they put that data online. If you think about companies that have data on you now, right? Think about any company that you use, any airline, anything that you're using. They'll probably have your email address. They'll probably have your name. They might have your actual home address. They might have your credit card data. They might have other, like your date of birth, things like that. And actually, that information is valuable to people as well. Because we know, for example, in the human trafficking industry, it's really important to have that kind of data. If I have that data, I can actually create identities for people, vulnerable people who I am trafficking. I can use Lisa Forte. I've got her date of birth. I've got her home address. I've got all these other pieces of information. I will copy her identity for this person that I am going to traffic. So that's worth money as well. So the entire thing creates a problem globally for so many things just purely from this one type of attack. And as I've spoken about with money laundering, the problem that we have, and I think this is probably one of the biggest problems, if we could stop the money, we'd stop the problem. But we can't stop the money. And one of the things I think is quite telling about how much of a problem we have created for ourselves here is many years ago, Pablo Escobar's accountant wrote a book. And in his book, he said that they had such a problem in Colombia trying to launder the money from the drugs. They had stacks of cash that they were burying in fields, and they were putting in sheds, and they were putting in attics of buildings, and all of the rest of it. Because they had too much cash, they couldn't move this money. So much so that their biggest problem was rats eating millions of dollars of money from these drugs. And they lost millions and millions of dollars from rats actually eating the money. And this was their biggest problem. And if you think now, however many years on from that, we've got groups of ransomware groups who can launder 20 million a week if they want, with nothing, no problem, no rats, no cash. This is the problem that we have. This is the problem we've walked into because they are more well-funded, they have more resource, they can hire more people, they can buy better tools, they can use AI, they can do whatever they want, and we do not have the money to counter what they're doing. And this is the problem that we have walked into. And the final impact is loss of operations. And one thing I want to talk about here that's quite interesting, and this will help you, I think, when you're looking in your careers, if you're going into cybersecurity. Because when we have a cyber attack, there are lots of technical things that are going on. But the business can't operate. And for every single business on the planet, whether you are a dentist or an investment bank or a hospital or whatever you are, there is a point in time where if you cannot get the business back online, you are finished. Every single business on the planet, there is this time that you cannot pass. One of my clients is an investment bank. They do trades. They have, at most, 3 hours to bring their entire business back online before they'll be finished. That's it. That's how long you have to take everything back online. Some companies, it's longer. But when you lose your operations of your business, every hour that passes, you are losing money. Every hour that passes, you are becoming in more and more trouble with your clients. You're getting lawsuits. You're getting all sorts of things. So when you see a cyber attack happen, when you see it in the news, just know that behind the scenes, it's panic because you haven't got very long to sort it out. So the key lessons I want to take away from this. Firstly, social engineering is key. In every single ransomware attack, social engineering is key. I guarantee you it will be a phishing email. It will be a phone call. It isn't sophisticated. The way these attackers are getting into our networks is not sophisticated. They are not burning 0 days at the moment. But we are not defending against it properly because they are still getting in using these things. Companies, they need to have a plan. You need to know what you would do if you got attacked. And threat intelligence is absolutely vital. And what I mean by threat intelligence is exactly what I've talked about today. Understanding how these attackers work, understanding how they think, understanding how they are assessing an organization as to whether they're going to attack you, and understanding how they are going after money. For example, ransomware groups, in my experience, in the attacks that have happened, the first thing they do when they get into your network is they look for your insurance documents. The first thing they go to look for, are you insured? do you have cyber insurance? When they find the cyber insurance policy, they look at what the limit of that policy is. Guess where they pitch the ransom? Just below the insurance threshold. Why? Because they know that the insurer will pay the ransom. If they go too big, they won't. So knowing that this is how they operate is key. So some companies I've seen actually putting fake insurance documents on their network and taking their actual insurance policy off their network, so that when the ransomware groups get in and they find the insurance policy, it's not actually the insurance policy at all. So things like this are really, really key. I hope that was interesting. I hope you've learned something. I know it was a bit depressing as a talk, but I can guarantee you cybersecurity is a fabulous career. There's tons of really interesting stuff that happens. But whatever you decide to do, one takeaway I think I would say is go and read what the threat actors are doing, because that informs everything we do in cybersecurity. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm around if you have any questions.